Hello pipe community, welcome back to the Barepipe channel where we're going to continue on with the Brigham pipe. I've done a whole bunch of steps on this pipe. I've cleaned the stem, I've polished it up, I've cleaned the pipe, I've cleaned the inside of the pipe, I did the charcoal treatment on it and the salt treatment. I'm not going to show you any of those because I've shown it to you in some or other way in the past, and so I've got a whole bunch of footage that I've discarded because I'm just repeating what I've done before. But I have something that I haven't done before, partially because I didn't know how to do this, and that is how to get a contrast stain on a rusticated surface. Now this pipe doesn't have a deep rusticated surface, it's fairly shallow, it's fairly rounded, so it's going to be interesting to see how that works. But I've done a whole bunch of experiments this week to try and figure out what the best way is to do that. And I think I've come across a technique or stumbled onto something that works for me. So I want to show you what I've learned. The one thing I will say about trying to get a contrast stain on a rusticated pipe is do not sand the base stain off in order to get the highlights clear of the base stain, because all you're going to do is ruin the rustication. That's probably the worst technique to do. Now, before we get into it, just a little more about rustication and contrast stains. There's really two types of contrast stain that you can get on a rusticated pipe. One would be to contrast the rustication, the other one would be to contrast the grain that's underneath the rustication. I'm talking about the former, and that's a more basic technique, one that I think is fairly common on rusticated pipes, and that is the technique where the valley of the rustication is one color and the ridge of the rustication is a contrasting color. What it ends up looking like is like the valley color was the stain of the pipe, and it kind of got rubbed off, and there's a base color that's coming through on the highlights. The other technique where you have the grain contrasted underneath the rustication, you actually have the base color running through both valleys and ridges of the rustication, and you have the contrast color doing the same because it's following the grain, not the rustication. I have no idea how that's done. There are some pipe makers who do it beautifully and it looks stunning, but I have no idea how they achieve it. So that is a mystery to me. But I think I have managed to figure out how to do a contrasting rustication. So let's get into it. Let me show you what I've learned. The pipe is ready to be stained. So what I want to do with this pipe is I want to do a stain where the base is black. This is going to be brown. The edge at the back is going to be brown. This is going to be brown. And then across the surface, I want some highlighted areas to be brown as well. But I want a nice deep jet black in the back. I've never done this before, but I'm going to try a different technique to be able to achieve that. To start with, I'm just going to plug the bowl. I'm going to mask some areas so that I don't put the black stain where I don't want it, so I don't have to do so much sanding on this. And here's what I'm going to use to mask it. It's called liquid mask. It's a rubber product that is made by Vallejo, the same people who make the fine scale modeling paints. And it's actually designed for fine scale plastic modeling. But I'm going to use it on the wood. But briar is pretty impervious, so I'm figuring it's not going to get absorbed into the briar. And I'm just going to squeeze out a little bit of it. It dries into like this greenish blue rubber. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint it onto the areas that I don't want affected. So you can see the rubber has now dried. So first step is going to be to get some black dye. Actually, I'm just going to go directly out of the bottle with this, because there's no need to be gentle with this. So we're going to take the pipe cleaner. I'm going to dip it in there, and we're just going to slap it on. Now the interesting step happens, and that is to use some steel wool. This is 000 steel wool, and I'm going to start buffing it with steel wool. And what it's going to do is also remove the rubber that's at the bottom. I may have to use my finger for this. There we go. You can see the rubber's coming off. For our next step, I'm going to need a brush, and I'm going to need some burgundy dye. So here's the thing that I've learned is when you do a second contrast or second stain on top of the black, you often actually lose quite a bit of the black. And the reason for that is that the second stain sits on top of the black and changes the color, and it actually gives it a bit of a coat. So here's my technique for getting around that, is I'm going to brush it on very carefully, just in the areas where I need it. It means a little bit more work, because it's a very subtle amount of work about a stain that goes on at any given time. It takes a little longer to do it this way than just slapping it on with a but I think it's worth it. And I'm just hitting the highlights. There's a technique in fine scale modeling that's called dry brushing. This is almost a variation of that. And I need a bit of paper towel to actually do this properly, especially when I get onto the surfaces. So I'm just going to put a little bit of paper towel here, because the reason is this: you need to kind of just soak off some of the, that's too much. just want to hit the highlights, with most of this actually not hitting the lower areas. I want areas that is jet black. Underneath this. As you can see, what happens is most of the stain only hits the top edges. Except for these areas where I want to give it a good solid. Part of the effect is to have some areas really be quite heavily stained and other areas not. Okay, I'm going to do a little more at the top here. Okay, now I'm going to give this a little bit of flaming. There's not a lot of alcohol on this, but I just want to burn it in just a little bit. And now we're going to I'm just going to give it again a light coating of pure alcohol. Just to help to flame it in properly. Okay, now it's time to wipe down the pipe a bit. So I'm going to dampen this, have it absorb a little bit. And this is just to get some of the excess stain off. Before we stick it on the buffer. That's the end result. I'm quite happy with it. I think it's done what it was supposed to do. And I'll take a couple of still photographs and I'll add that to the end of the video here, which will show you exactly what it looks like. It's exactly what I was hoping to achieve. It's kind of an old school finish for an old school pipe. So until next time, when I see you back at the bench, thanks for watching.